Johntay Cook has not yet committed to Syracuse football, but here's why I'm not worried just yet.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And shout out to all those who continue to subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. On today's show, more offensive line help could be coming. We saw Syracuse get South Carolina tackle Cam Pringle yesterday, and well, the Orange are trending for another offensive lineman, so stay tuned later on in the show. Plus, we'll go over the unlikely, I cannot stress that word enough, the unlikely scenario that Syracuse does not get Johntay Cook. And we are going to start the podcast talking about why you should not panic just yet that Johntay Cook has not committed to Syracuse football. Now, folks, obviously, we're still waiting for the official announcement, hence why this podcast is being released earlier than usual. Normally on weekdays, I release the podcast at 6 p.m. Eastern, but because we're still waiting for Johntay Cook and things can happen in a hurry, well, you're getting this podcast just a little bit earlier. All that and more here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. But before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On Sunday afternoon, On Threes, Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong each logged crystal ball predictions for Syracuse to land former five-star wide receiver at Texas and at Washington, Johntay Cook. And we did an entire podcast on Monday discussing the significance of landing not one, but two crystal ball predictions from two of some of the best insiders in the business. And I said on the podcast that this move is essentially inevitable. Like, this is most likely going to happen because these people are saying it's going to happen. That was Sunday when they made their predictions. Now, it's Wednesday, April 30th at the time of this recording at 1:17 p.m. Eastern. And Johntay Cook has yet to commit to Syracuse football. Should you be worried? Should you be panicking? Should you be making alternative arrangements? Let's all relax a little bit. I'm not worried just yet, and here's why. And later on in the podcast, next segment actually, we will talk about the alternatives to Johntay Cook if Syracuse does, in fact, miss out on him. I don't believe they're going to miss out on him, and here's why. Number one, Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong are two of the best college football insiders in the business. They make these predictions for a living, and they are not usually wrong. In fact, you can actually hold them accountable as insiders. You can click on their profiles over at On3, and you can see their all-time predictions, where they got things right, where they got things wrong, and you can even see their percentages. And I actually looked them up this morning, so let's do it. Let's hold Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong accountable for their predictions. Are these reliable? Well, Pete Nakos has made, at the time of this recording, 219 all-time predictions with an accuracy of over 97%. It's pretty good, right? Steve Wiltfong, 639 all-time predictions And he has gotten them right nearly 92% of the time. So even though Wiltfong is about 5% worse than Pete Nakos on predictions, they are still over 90%. And by the way, both of them are saying that Syracuse is going to land Johntay Cook. I'll let you math nerds figure out the probability of Johntay Cook now not going to Syracuse when you got two national insiders that hit on well over 90% of their predictions saying that it's going to happen. So that's number one. Wiltfong and Nakos are saying this is likely going to happen. I am going to trust their word on this. They're not perfect, but they get it right more than 90% of the time. Pete Nakos, 97% of the time. You get the picture now. Number two, a precursor domino has fallen. Yesterday, Florida State wide receiver, also a former 2023 five-star recruit in Hakeem Williams, committed to Colorado. For those that may not know, maybe you haven't been necessarily following along the podcast over the last week, and that's okay. I'm here to update you all. I understand you have busy days and you might not catch every single Locked On Syracuse episode. That's fine. But Syracuse was heavily involved with Hakeem Williams. Again, a 2023 five-star wide receiver, exactly the same as Johntay Cook. Very similar career arcs. They were involved. They were the last team that got a visit for Hakeem Williams, but he ultimately decides to go to Colorado. Now, I was feeling a little greedy. I would have loved if Syracuse got Hakeem Williams and Johntay Cook. That would have been, I think, terrific for Syracuse. But I kind of figured that this was going to be one of those scenarios where it's one receiver or the other. You're not going to get both. And so Hakeem Williams goes to Colorado. That leaves Johntay Cook for Syracuse. And let's say it was one or the other, or it is one or the other, and Syracuse ended up with Hakeem Williams and they did not get Johntay Cook. I wouldn't really be upset about it. I don't know about you. Do you feel differently? I mean, who did you prefer, Johntay Cook or Hakeem Williams? Comment in the comment section below. I slightly prefer Johntay Cook anyway, but hey, they're very similar in terms of career arcs. They do play a little bit differently, but they both have a ton of talent. I don't think Syracuse could really go wrong either way. So I wasn't going to complain if they got Williams and the prediction for Cook was wrong. Number three, where else is Johntay Cook going to go? Where is he going to go other than Syracuse football? Now, he has visited other places. Arizona State and Arkansas. And there may be others, but those are the only two that I am aware of in the spring portal cycle that Johntay Cook has been to. Obviously, Syracuse got a visit as well. While in theory, Arizona State or Arkansas could steal Johntay Cook away from Syracuse, or maybe another team swoops in and goes and gets him. Keep in mind the timing. Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong logged their predictions for Syracuse to land Cook after his visits with Arizona State and Arkansas. So this is not one of those scenarios where you got two experts that log a prediction and then all of a sudden the player is visiting other places. That actually makes me feel even better that he did go on those visits and then the predictions came in for Syracuse football. Had it been the opposite, had they logged the predictions and then he goes to other visits, maybe I'd be a little bit more worried about Johntay Cook not coming to Syracuse. So overall, I cannot 100% promise you all that Johntay Cook will be with Syracuse football. But what I can promise you is that I am being genuine, that I am not worried one bit. And I strongly believe that Johntay Cook will, in fact, end up with Syracuse football. Knock on wood. Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. That being said, it's super unlikely, but let's talk about what happens if Johntay Cook does not end up with Syracuse football? That's coming up next on Locked On Syracuse. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Most likely, Johntay Cook will commit to Syracuse football. But what happens if he does not commit to the Orange? I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse. And let's talk briefly, real quick, about the unlikely scenario that the expert insiders are wrong and Johntay Cook decides not to go to Syracuse football. I don't really care what other school he would end up with. It would just stink if the Orange do not get him. And it should be noted that I do believe that at this stage in the offseason, Syracuse football kind of has to get Johntay Cook. Now, before you come at me saying, well, Jackson, are you not confident in this current wide receiver group? We have this player, that player, that player. I understand. But what the staff is telling you publicly is that they are looking for at least another wide receiver in the transfer portal, maybe even multiple wide receivers in the portal, including Johntay Cook. So the staff feels that they need a wide receiver, and we're about to talk about why Syracuse really needs to get Johntay Cook. Number one, let's say they don't get it. As we just hit on, Syracuse will likely still add another wide receiver in the transfer portal. I don't believe that this is a scenario where they're targeting Johntay Cook only, and if they don't get Johntay Cook, they will not add another wide receiver in the portal. They will simply roll with what they have. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think Syracuse, no matter what, is going to go out and get one or two wide receivers. In fact, 24/7 Sports Syracuse insider Mike McAllister wrote in his recent scholarship tracking article, quote, Syracuse continues to target transfer receivers and could add one or two more to this group. That sentence alone should tell you that Syracuse, even if they do miss out on Johntay Cook, will still most likely add another wide receiver or two in the transfer portal because the staff believes that that is a position of need on the team. I mean, especially because they lost Trevor Pena. We can sit here and try to minimize the loss, system player, That was still a team captain that had a great year last year, was second team All ACC, that you're going to have to find a way to replace. And getting Johntay Cook would be terrific, or any transfer wide receiver for that matter, could help in replacing a guy like Pena. Who will they target? Now that we have established that Syracuse will likely still go out and get a wide receiver or two. Well, here are the players that the Orange are linked to. We already talked about Hakeem Williams from Florida State. He would have been the most ideal pivot because he's also a 2023 former five-star wide receiver. The difference between him and Johntay Cook is that he's dealt with a lot of injuries over his first 2 years in college. He had a season-ending ankle injury in his true freshman year, and then last season he had a nagging hamstring injury to start the season. But again, he's off to Colorado, so that option is off the board. You also got Rakeem Smith from Bowling Green, who had about 350 yards last year and 3 touchdowns. And you got Trajan Bridges from Central Arkansas. He had about 750 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. After that, the options are quite limited at wide receiver. For whatever reason, and I really don't know why, but if you go look on the On3 rankings for wide receivers in the transfer portal, I could not find Johntay Cook. I command F on my keyboard. I typed up Cook to see where he would pop up. I tried eyeballing it just in case Command F was not working. Command F was working. I couldn't find him. I don't know why On3 does not have him listed in the receiver rankings. You could find him in the database, though. So let's just only use 24/7 Sports here to demonstrate my point that the options are pretty limited beyond Johntay Cook. Right now on 24/7 Sports, Cook is the second best wide receiver available in the transfer portal and 43rd best wide receiver overall. After Johntay Cook, there are only about a handful of wide receivers that are available that are inside the top 150, and only a couple of them are inside the top 100. Nobody is near where Johntay Cook ranks in the portal. Now, I understand that portal rankings aren't everything. They don't always tell the story. There are multiple factors that go into recruiting rankings. It's not just based on your production, it's also based on years of eligibility, where you were at in school, especially that matters in football, less so in basketball. But I think that demonstrates the fact that outside of Johntay Cook, who else is really out there for Syracuse football? I mean, who would you like to see them target? Comment in the comment section below. So in the unlikely event that Syracuse misses out on Johntay Cook, the options become really limited, and I don't necessarily know what they're going to do at wide receiver in the transfer portal as far as who they are going to get. We talked about the possible targets, but none of them are as intriguing as a guy like Johntay Cook. So in my opinion, they can't miss out on him. They have to find a way to seal the deal. I don't care when, I don't care how, just figure it out. What are your thoughts? Comment in the comments section below. Do you believe that Johntay Cook is a must get for Syracuse football at this point in the offseason? I want to hear from you in the comments section below. Again, it's April 30th. Okay, it is April 30th at the time of this recording. Had this been in December and they missed out on Johntay Cook, we'd be sitting here saying, okay, wait until the spring. Or maybe if this was a couple of weeks ago. All right, you still got time. Options are dwindling here. I think you got to seal the deal. All right, so that just about does it for the Johntay Cook discussion. Again, it's highly likely that they're going to end up with him, but I figured let's just touch on it briefly on what happens if they don't get him. Now, coming up, Syracuse got an offensive lineman yesterday in Cam Pringle from South Carolina, and we're already seeing the ripple effects of that move. Let's talk about it next on Locked On Syracuse. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making it to this portion of the podcast. I hope that means that you enjoy the Locked On Syracuse podcast. And if so, if you could just do me a favor, hit that like button, and more importantly, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications so you know when I am dropping the next podcast. Plus, by hitting the subscribe button, it's free, allows the channel to show up directly on your feed, and also helps Locked On Syracuse grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. We're done with the Johntay Cook discussion for today. Let's now talk about Syracuse's offensive line. In case you missed it yesterday, Syracuse football got a consensus top 25 overall tackle in the transfer portal. Of course, I'm talking about South Carolina's Cam Pringle. Cam Pringle was a 2024 four-star recruit. There is a mini podcast on the Locked On Syracuse channel talking specifically about Cam Pringle, so you can check that out when you are done watching or listening to this podcast. To just summarize it for you, though, my guess is that he will end up being the starting left tackle for Syracuse football on opening day against Tennessee, but at the very least, he's going to have the opportunity to be the starting left tackle, so he'll compete in training camp. And he could be, at least for this year, a nice developmental piece if he does not end up getting the job. The question I ended the mini podcast, though, on talking about Cam Pringle is this. Is Syracuse football done adding to its offensive line? Because we broke down on the mini podcast that, hey, you can kind of see clearly, or a little bit more clearly, Syracuse's starting offensive line for the upcoming season. You got Cam Pringle at left tackle, Joshua Miller at left guard, Mark Petrie at center, Austin Collins right guard, and Demetrius Witherspoon at right tackle. So it seems like it's pretty clear, right? Well, not so fast. Syracuse football does not appear done adding to its offensive line in the transfer portal. But before we get to that big news, I talked about how Syracuse is trending for an offensive lineman. Let's just see if they actually can do it, okay? Because you got limited scholarships remaining. Well, according to 24/7 Sports, Syracuse insider Mike McAllister, assuming that the scholarship limit is 105, the Orange have 6 open scholarships remaining. That includes the addition of Cam Pringle. And let's also assume that Johntay Cook does commit to Syracuse. That really means that the Orange have 5 open scholarships remaining. What are the needs for the Orange aside from the offensive line? Do they really have the space to add another offensive lineman? Well, there's possibly 3 more. Linebacker, defensive back, and maybe another wide receiver, not counting Johntay Cook. So let's say Syracuse does add another wide receiver. Let's say they do add another linebacker. Let's say they add a defensive back on top of Johntay Cook. Well, that means Syracuse would still have a couple of open scholarships remaining. So they do have the space to add another offensive lineman if they so choose. In fact, Mike McAllister actually was quoted on that article saying, Syracuse is still looking to add players through the transfer portal along the offensive line. I think if Syracuse does add another offensive lineman, it'll be a guard rather than a tackle, and that leads to the big news. The name to keep an eye on is North Carolina interior lineman Zach Rice. On Three's Pete Nakos actually reported earlier today that Syracuse is one of the teams that is trending for him. Rice was actually a 5-star tackle in 2022, but he has only played 44 career snaps at North Carolina, and they have all come at right guard. We'll talk more about him on a podcast tomorrow, but the bottom line is this. Syracuse football is not done adding to its offensive line. I think it's more likely that they go guard rather than tackle, because I do think that Cam Pringle was the tackle that Syracuse was ultimately looking for, or just the one that they simply ended up with, especially because we saw more news earlier today. Jalen Matthews, who was in the transfer portal, who visited Syracuse, a 2025 recruit, but he decided to decommit from Rutgers, and I guess that means he went to the transfer portal even as a recruit. Well, he went to Florida State earlier today, April 30th. And also Sam Houston tackle Orion Irving, who also visited Syracuse. I think it's also likely that he ends up elsewhere. That being said, the Orange are hunting for offensive line help. They get Cam Pringle yesterday, and now it appears likely that they are going to get North Carolina's Zach Rice. What do you think about Syracuse's offensive line at this point? Comment in the comment section below. It does not appear like they are done adding to the unit. And guess what? You can never have enough offensive line help, right? Can't hurt to add. As far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, we're going to just continue to monitor the statuses of Johntay Cook and Zach Rice, if and when those guys do, in fact, commit to Syracuse football. For now, tomorrow, the plan is to do another offensive line podcast. I know we're doing a lot of offensive line podcasts, but it's one of the big positions of need for Syracuse football, and they seem to be always connected to offensive linemen, and we'll go more in depth on Zach Rice. All right? Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, you could check out the Locked On Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. In fact, I'm going to try to get on Brian Smith here on the podcast if and when guys like Johntay Cook and Zach Rice do commit to Syracuse football. Speaking of the Portal podcast, though, you can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, allows the channel to grow so it can reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And folks, you're going to want to hit that bell button to turn on those notifications so you know when I am dropping the next podcast, because we are still in portal season. Both Syracuse basketball and Syracuse football are still trying to add players. And, well, I'm going to try to record as soon as possible if and when those guys do get added. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. And I will see you all again soon.